My name's Ryan. I'm 27. And last week, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table and casually told me they'd reallocated the $250,000 I'd spent the last 9 years saving for a house. My dad even actually laughed, when he said, "Thanks for funding your brother's future." And in that moment, I just smiled. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. Because the truth is, they had no idea they'd just stepped right into the trap I'd been setting for months. But before I get ahead of myself, let me back up. I grew up the middle child of three. My older brother, Evan, has always been the golden boy. Captain of the football team in high school, straight into a good college, paid for by my parents, first to get married, first to have kids. My younger sister, Chloe, was the baby of the family, the one who could do no wrong. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who worked part-time jobs, kept to myself, and didn't really cause trouble. I think my parents got used to the idea that I was fine and didn't need much. After college, I got a decent job in IT and moved back into my old room for a while. It wasn't glamorous, but it let me save aggressively. Every paycheck, I put away half. Nights and weekends, I freelanced fixing computers and designing websites. Birthdays, bonuses, even tax refunds, I saved them all. Over 9 years, I built up a nest egg big enough to buy a modest house outright in my area. And here's where things start getting complicated. Evan, the golden boy, had been living a very different life. He and his wife were constantly investing in new ideas, a failed restaurant, a doomed real estate flip, a subscription box startup that never made it past launch. Each time, my parents bailed him out. They'd dip into their savings, take out small loans, even co-sign on credit cards. And every time they'd say the same thing: "He just needs a break." I bit my tongue through all of it. I figured, fine, it's their money, their choice. But about a year ago, things came to a head. Evan announced he was going to open a boutique gym with a wellness cafe attached. He pitched it like he was presenting to Shark Tank, complete with slides. And at the end of his little presentation, he looked right at me and said, "You could be our tech guy. Invest some of that money you've been hoarding." I told him no, flat out. I wasn't going to throw my life savings into another one of his half-baked ventures. He sulked for weeks after that, telling everyone I was selfish and not a team player. My parents didn't say anything at first, but I could tell they agreed with him. Then, a few months ago, my mom started dropping hints. Little comments over dinner like, "You're young, you'll make it back," or "Family should help each other out." At first, I ignored it. But then it turned into longer conversations where she'd tell me how stressed Evan was, how much this business meant to him, how this could finally be the thing that works. I kept saying no. And then, 3 weeks ago, I logged into my bank account and felt my stomach drop. The money was gone. Every last cent of the $250,000 I had saved was transferred out. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through the transaction history, and that's when I saw it. A single transfer to an account I didn't recognize. I confronted my parents that night. They didn't even look guilty. My mom just crossed her arms and said, "It's done, Ryan. We had to make an executive decision for the good of the family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said the line that's been ringing in my ears ever since: "Thanks for funding your brother's future." I felt like the air got sucked out of the room. My hands were shaking. I wanted to scream, to demand they give it back, to threaten to call the police. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I sat down, took a slow breath, and smiled. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I'd been preparing for something like this. For months, I'd been quietly documenting every conversation, every text message where they pressured me to help the family. I'd moved most of my actual savings to a separate account under an LLC I'd set up. The account they drained? It was bait. But I didn't tell them that. Not yet. Instead, I let them talk. I let them explain how Evan was going to pay me back double once the gym took off. I nodded along, even congratulated them for finally doing something bold. My dad looked smug, my mom relieved. They thought I'd accepted it. That night, I went back to my room and sat in the dark for hours, just staring at the ceiling. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part of me wanted to burn the whole house down. But mostly, I felt something else. A cold, calm determination. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. And that's where things started to get interesting. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else and just sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the backyard. My parents thought they had just solved their problem child. Evan thought he had secured his golden ticket. I knew better. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of birds. It was the perfect kind of silence for thinking. I kept replaying last night's conversation in my head. The way my dad's mouth curled into a smirk. The way my mom said, executive decision, like she was running a company, not steamrolling her own son. The way Evan wasn't even there, probably out celebrating with his wife. I let myself feel angry this time. Really angry. My hands gripped the coffee mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. By noon, I had calmed down enough to act like everything was normal. That was the first rule I set for myself. Stay calm, stay quiet, stay patient. I couldn't let them know I was planning anything. If I blew up now, they might try to undo the transfer, might sense that I wasn't as powerless as they thought. That evening, I joined everyone in the living room like nothing happened. Mom was watching TV, Dad was reading the paper, and I just sat down on the couch and asked casually, "So when's the big grand opening?" Mom lit up immediately, happy that I was coming around. She started telling me about Evan's plans, how they'd found a perfect building to lease, how they were already ordering equipment. I nodded along, even asked questions, playing the part of the supportive brother. Inside, I was memorizing every detail. A few days later, Evan came by the house, grinning like he had just won the lottery. "Dude, you won't regret this," he said, slapping me on the shoulder. "This gym is going to be massive. You'll thank me when you're sipping smoothies in the VIP lounge." "Yeah," I said with a little smile. "I'm sure I will." What he didn't notice was the small flash drive in my pocket. Earlier that morning, I had backed up every single message thread, every bank statement, every email that showed where the money had gone. I had copies in the cloud, copies on an encrypted drive, and one set locked in a safe deposit box under my name. If things got messy, I was going to be ready. At night, when everyone was asleep, I sat at my laptop building out the next phase of my plan. Step 1 was making sure they couldn't claim ignorance later. I drafted an email to my parents and Evan, laying out in polite, formal language that I understood my contribution to the gym project was involuntary, but that I expected transparent financial reporting as a silent investor. I even signed it with my LLC name to make it look more official. Mom replied the next morning with a single line, "Of course, honey. We'll keep you updated." Perfect. That was exactly what I needed. Written confirmation that they knew what they had done. For the next few weeks, I kept my head down and acted like nothing was wrong. I went to work, kept saving my real money, and on weekends, I even stopped by the gym location under the guise of checking on my investment. Evan loved showing me around. He'd gesture at the half-painted walls and the rows of unopened equipment and talk about how they were making history. But the cracks were already starting to show. One afternoon, I overheard Evan and his wife arguing in the parking lot. She was worried about the budget, about how much debt they were racking up, about the fact that membership pre-sales were lower than expected. Evan brushed it off, saying, "Ryan will cover us if we go over. He owes me." I stood there behind a column, listening, my jaw tight. That sentence, "he owes me," lit something in my chest. It was one thing for my parents to think of my savings as a family resource, but hearing my brother say I owed him after everything I'd done to stay independent, that was the moment I knew there was no going back. That night, I didn't just plan. I started pulling strings. I reached out to a friend of mine from college, Derek, who happened to work in commercial real estate. I asked him to quietly look into the lease agreement Evan had signed. A few days later, he called me back with some very interesting information. The lease was under my parents' names as guarantors, not Evan's. Meaning if the gym defaulted, my parents would be the ones financially responsible. That little detail gave me leverage I hadn't even realized I had. Over the next week, I started collecting everything I might need for the moment I decided to strike. Copies of receipts, pictures of the unfinished gym, voice memos of conversations where Evan bragged about how he secured my money. Each piece felt like adding a brick to the foundation of something big, something inevitable. Meanwhile, my parents kept acting like nothing was wrong. They'd ask me if I was excited, if I wanted to come to the soft launch, if I wanted to invite friends. I'd just smile and say, "Yeah, maybe." Inside, the pressure was building. The night before the soft opening, Evan invited the whole family to the gym for a special preview. I stood in the middle of the half-finished space, looking at the shiny new equipment, the expensive lighting fixtures, the logo stenciled on the wall. Everyone was laughing, drinking champagne, talking about how this was the start of a new era. I just stood there quietly, holding my glass, feeling this strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. Because tomorrow was the day everything started. The morning of the soft opening, I woke up earlier than usual and just sat on the edge of my bed staring at my phone. Weeks of patience, fake smiles, and silent planning had brought me here. My parents thought today was going to be a celebration. Evan thought it was the first day of the rest of his life. None of them realized that today was the day I started turning the screws. I put on a casual button-down and jeans, just enough to look like I cared, and drove over to the gym. The parking lot was already busy with early guests, friends, and family taking pictures outside the front door. Inside, Evan was in full showman mode, shaking hands and giving little speeches about how this was just the beginning. I kept my hands in my pockets, quiet and observant. I walked around, taking mental notes of everything I saw. The piles of unused boxes in the storage room, the unfinished flooring in the back hallway, the staff-only area where I knew Evan was keeping equipment receipts and membership forms. At one point, Mom pulled me aside. "Doesn't it feel good to see what your money is building?" she said, smiling at me like this was some touching family moment. I met her eyes and smiled back, not the fake smile I'd been practicing, but something sharper. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "It feels really good to see exactly where every dollar went." If she noticed the edge in my tone, she didn't say anything. Evan called everyone together near the front desk and started making a little speech about the dream finally coming true. People clapped, raised their champagne glasses, and someone started playing upbeat music from a Bluetooth speaker. It was the perfect distraction for me to slip away unnoticed into the office. I closed the door behind me and exhaled slowly. My heart was beating hard, but my hands were steady as I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and slid it into the computer. Within minutes, I had copied every file I needed: the membership contracts, the vendor invoices, the payment schedules, all the evidence I would need to prove how much of my money had actually been spent and how much debt they had quietly taken on. Before I left, I took a picture of the whiteboard in the corner. Scrawled in big letters was a list of overdue bills and a note: "Need more cash by 15th. That photo would come in handy later. When I stepped back out into the main area, no one had noticed I was gone. Evan was leading a tour of the weight room, bragging about the imported equipment. I just rejoined the group, nodding along as if nothing had happened. That night, I sent a polite but formal email to Evan and my parents. "Thank you for the preview today. As your silent investor, I'd like to request a full copy of the business plan, a monthly financial report, and a signed acknowledgement of my ownership percentage in the venture. Please provide this by the end of the week." It wasn't a demand, not yet. It was a test, a way to see how they would respond. The reply came faster than I expected. Evan sent a short, annoyed message. "Ryan, this isn't Shark Tank. You don't get to make demands just because you put money in. Chill out." My mom followed up with a longer, more measured response, trying to smooth things over. "Sweetheart, we know you're nervous, but this is family. You have to trust us. We'll keep you updated, but we don't need to turn this into something formal. Evan needs room to make decisions without feeling watched." I read the email twice, then closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. They still didn't get it. They still thought this was just about money, that I would grumble, then back down. But I wasn't backing down. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet and started putting the second part of my plan into motion. I scheduled a private meeting with Derek, my real estate friend, and went over the lease agreement in detail. Then I talked to another friend of mine, Melissa, who worked in accounting, and asked her to take a look at the invoices I'd copied from Evan's computer. What she found made me almost laugh out loud. A lot of the equipment wasn't paid for in full. It was leased with staggered payments. And if the business defaulted on those payments, the supplier could repossess everything within 30 days. Even better, the first major payment was coming due in less than 3 weeks. In other words, Evan's dream gym was sitting on a very fragile foundation. I spent the next week gathering more information, quietly but relentlessly. I pulled up county records to check the property details, learned which contractors were still owed money, and even visited the small business association in town to talk, hypothetically, of course, about investor rights in situations where funds had been used without consent. Every step made me calmer, more focused. By the second weekend, my parents invited me over for dinner. I showed up, sat at the table, and listened to them talk about how successful the opening had been, how Evan was already signing up more members than expected. I kept my face neutral, nodding, even smiling. Then my dad leaned back in his chair and said, "See, we told you this was a good idea. You were worried for nothing." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment I almost felt sorry. Almost. Because I knew something he didn't. By this time next month, the entire game would change, and they wouldn't be the ones holding the cards. 2 weeks later, I got the call I had been waiting for. Evan's voice on the other end of the line was sharp and irritated, not the usual cocky confidence he used when talking about his business. "Ryan," he said without even saying hello, "we need more money. The flooring contractor is threatening to walk, and we've got a big payment due for the equipment lease. If we don't get ahead of it, we're going to miss the deadline." I didn't say anything for a second. I just let the silence stretch. "Ryan," he said again, his voice a little more urgent. "Finally," I said, "send me the financial reports I asked for first. Then we'll talk." There was a pause on the line. "This isn't the time to play hardball," he snapped. "This is family. You either step up or we all go down together." And that was it. That was the moment I had been waiting for. "I'll send you my decision in writing," I said evenly, then hung up. That night, I drafted the email that would light the match. "Dear Evan and Mom and Dad, as requested, I am following up on my previous communication. Since I have not received any formal documentation or acknowledgement of my ownership in the gym, and given that the funds were taken from me without my consent, I am officially demanding full repayment of the $250,000 within 14 days. If repayment is not made, I will proceed with legal action to recover the funds, including but not limited to filing a police report for unauthorized transfer, contacting the bank's fraud department, and pursuing civil action for misappropriation of funds. Please note that I have already documented and preserved all relevant evidence, including bank transfers, text messages, and email conversations, as well as photos of the gym and its current financial liabilities. I will also be notifying your equipment supplier, landlord, and contractors of the disputed funds and my lack of consent as an investor. I am happy to settle this privately, but only if repayment is made in full by the stated deadline. Regards, Ryan." I sent it to all three of them, CC'd my LLC email address, and sat back in my chair feeling the calmest I had in weeks. The fallout was almost immediate. My mom called first, panicked. "Ryan, what are you doing? You can't just threaten your own family like this." "You took my money without asking," I said flatly. "This is me asking for it back, nicely. Your father and I just wanted to help Evan get a leg up," she pleaded. "He has a family to support." "So do I," I cut her off. "And you made that choice for me without even asking. Now I'm making mine." She started crying, which was hard to hear, but I didn't back down. "I'm giving you 2 weeks," I repeated. "After that, this goes legal." 2 days later, I got a furious call from Evan. "You're insane," he shouted. "You're going to ruin everything. If you do this, the gym will go under. Mom and Dad will be on the hook for the lease, and we'll all be in trouble." "That's not my problem," I said calmly. "You should have thought about that before you used stolen money to fund your dream." "It wasn't stolen," he yelled. "Was it your account?" I asked. "Did you have permission?" The silence on the other end was answer enough. After that, things escalated quickly. My dad stormed into my room one night, his face red. "You're tearing this family apart," he growled. "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you decided my savings were a family slush fund." The next few days were tense. I could feel the shift every time I walked into the house. The glares, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I didn't rise to any of it. I just waited. Day 10 of the deadline, I got an email from the gym's equipment supplier confirming that they had received notice of a potential financial dispute and were monitoring the situation. Day 12, the flooring contractor called me directly, asking if I knew when payment would come through because they were ready to file a lien. I politely told them to contact my parents, as they were the lease guarantors. By day 14, I hadn't received a cent from anyone. So, just as I promised, I filed a fraud report with the bank and provided copies of every piece of evidence I had. I contacted a lawyer and sent a letter of intent to sue. And I CC'd Evan, my parents, and, at my lawyer's suggestion, the landlord and major suppliers. That's when the real implosion began. Evan called me in a panic. "You've doomed us," he said, his voice shaking. "The landlord just called. If we miss another payment, they're terminating the lease. We've already sunk too much into this place to back out now." "Then pay me back," I said simply. "We don't have the money," he snapped. "That sounds like a you problem," I said, then hung up. 2 days later, the gym was closed temporarily. Within a week, the equipment supplier came in and repossessed half the machines. The flooring contractor filed a lien, and the landlord locked the doors for non-payment. And my parents? They were suddenly very quiet around me. One night, Dad finally knocked on my door. He didn't look angry this time, just tired. "We can't pay you back," he admitted. We lost most of it already." "I know," I said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "That's why I'm giving you this." He frowned, picking it up. It was a notarized agreement. They would sign over their share of the family vacation property, a cabin they had always promised to pass down to us kids, to me exclusively, in lieu of repayment. If they didn't sign, I would proceed with the lawsuit. For a long moment, Dad just stared at the paper. Then he signed it. When the ink was dry, I stood up and looked him in the eye. "You taught me a lot," I said quietly. "Mostly what not to do." The next weekend, I drove out to the cabin alone. The lake was calm, the air cool and quiet. I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking out over the water, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Evan's gym never reopened. My parents eventually had to sell their house to cover the debts from the lease. We barely speak now, and when we do, it's polite, surface-level conversation, nothing deeper. But every time I unlock the cabin door and step inside, I think about that night at the kitchen table, about my dad's smug little laugh, about the way they all thought I would just roll over and take it. And I smile, because in the end, I didn't just get my money back. I got my freedom. If you've enjoyed this story, let me know your thoughts in the comments below.